Okay, I would like to try to keep this, I know I'm being taped here, I'd like to try to keep this as informal as possible. So if you have questions along the way, let's make this interactive as possible. So as Mark said, I, over on West Campus, Government Resource Centers on West Campus, most of the projects I work with or manage or facilitate are in the realm of developmental disabilities. So my two primary sponsor agencies that I work with are the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council and the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. And so the agency who sponsored this study, the waiting list study for short, was the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council. They really had a big interest in this topic because in Ohio, there are a lot of people waiting for services. And it depends on your data source, but anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 to 70,000 people waiting for service. I see some nodding your head, so you know kind of what I'm talking about. But if you just think of the term waiting list, it automatically, that term is kind of provocative just because you're waiting for something and you're not getting it, and people are frustrated, like, why am I not getting it? Okay, so and for the council, they would hear, so they're an advocacy organization, they would hear a lot of complaints from their members, like, hey, what's going on here? Why are we waiting so long for services? And really, the state who manages this waiting list, they don't have a lot of information about why people are waiting, what kind of services are waiting for, how long. So it's all kind of mysterious to the public. And so again, that was the council's interest. Is like, let's try to demystify what people are waiting for, what services, how long they're waiting. And so that was our charge. So we started this back in 2013. It really was a collaborative effort between the council, Government Resource Center, Kent State, and the Department of Developmental Disabilities. And those were just some of the panel members, either coming from one of those three groups, and also we had some folks with developmental disabilities too on there just to help us. We developed a survey tool that we went out and used just to make sure the questions were meaningful. And so really got a lot of great information for lots of different people. The other group I wanted to mention was Kent State. So Kent State, we always try to bring in collaborative partners from different universities within the state. So they worked with us in conducting the survey. So again, lots of partners, lots of collaboration. And so what I'm going to go through here in describing the study is just give you a little bit of background, talk about a little bit more like why there's an interest in this topic, some of the methodology we developed in tackling this study, and then kind of go through the results. One data source that we used was actual waiting list data that the department has collected. The other is survey data that we collected from individuals and their families who are on the waiting list. And then we're going to go through, what are the limits for how much can we really infer from this information, and then talk about what we learned from the study. So, in any given study, it's like you got to figure out here, why is this important? Why are we really doing this? And I gave you a little bit of background that when you're talking about waiting lists, I mean, it's just a very emotional kind of thing. So I'm signing up for a service that I know I need as an individual, and the government's telling me, well, we'll try to get you those services at some point, but you have no idea how long you're gonna wait. You have no idea, is the system fair for you in terms of getting the service versus someone else. You just don't. You just have to put a lot of faith there, and an agency that you don't know a lot about. So, I think it's inherent in any kind of system where you have like waiting lists, where people kind of doubt kind of like the fairness of the system, especially if there's not a lot of information forthcoming on that data collection system. Okay, so again, the focus of the council was, let's try to shed some light on this, on this waiting list. Now, I mean, the state has rules and regulations in terms of how those waiting lists are managed, but again, not putting out a lot of information about that. Part of it is really there's not a lot of information collected. I mean, you pretty much, kind of like just sign up, and there's some additional information collected, but not a ton. Okay. What we do know from what is collected is that as of June 2013, there's about 41,000 people on the waiting list. Okay. Now, I mentioned, on the waiting list as if there's just one waiting list. There's actually 88 waiting lists, and that information is submitted to the Department of Developmental Disabilities. So I gotta take a step back and talk about terms here. One is county board. Okay, Mark tells me some of these talks deal in the policy realm. This is a policy talk. Okay, this is my love. I love policy, long-term care policy, developmental disability policy, and waiting lists is just a huge topic in the policy world, not just in Ohio, but nationally. But Ohio is a lot different from other states in the country, in that a lot of services, the funding for those services for folks with developmental disabilities comes from the county or the local level. So they fund over $1 billion worth of services for people with developmental disabilities. And so that's different than how it works in most of the country. So you would expect when you're funding, and so they're a significant funding source compared to, let's say, the state. I mean, if you did percentage-wise, and I'm just kind of throwing out rough percentages, maybe it's like 40% of funding comes from the local DD board. So each county has a developmental disability board. And then maybe 40% of funding comes from the federal government, another 20% comes from the state. For those who have ever, who are familiar with funding for DD things, does that sound familiar? It's kind of very, very rough. Okay, but if you're a major funder like that, you're gonna wanna have a say, in how things work. And so certainly the counties do, kind of have a significant voice in how services are funded in Ohio for folks with developmental disabilities. And they collect, the data on the waiting list, and then they transmit it over to the state. So that's, one thing I wanted to get straight, and maybe some of you know, is that most of the funding is run through county boards of DD, and that's significant in Ohio, okay? So we have 88 waiting lists sitting out there, and then, but I'll refer to it as just one waiting list that's collected statewide, because each county does have to submit their waiting list to the state. Now, you're allowed to, in Ohio, you could sign up at different boards. Even if you're a resident, let's say I'm a resident in Cuyahoga County, I can sign up for services in Franklin, and that's fine. But the information we're going to be dealing with is unduplicated, okay? So, perhaps a duplicated count is like 60,000, because a number of people think, hey, I'll increase my odds if I just sign up everywhere. which probably isn't the case, but you never know, so what the heck, right? Okay, so the other significant term here is waivers. I don't know, how many of you have ever heard that term waivers? Okay, great. Who wants to give me a definition of what it means? Now, it's actually complicated and not. I'll give you my simplistic definition, and that is it's a package of non-traditional healthcare services, okay? And typically those services are done by unlicensed personnel. So I think of them as like homemaker personal services, like an aide who comes into a home, or an attendant who's helping that individual for so many hours a week. It could be, couple hours a day to 20 hours a day. I mean, it just really depends on the support needs of the individual. So there's reasons that it's called waivers, and I'm not going to get into that. But the main thing, if you just think of it as a package of services, and there's two packages of services in Ohio. The two key ones are the individual options waiver. So maybe you've heard that term. That's the expensive package. So that package you can get anywhere, depending on your support needs, $5,000 worth of services up to $300,000, okay? So there's a lot of variability there, right? and certainly the state and the county have a lot of interest in managing that. Now, when we talk about waivers, we also talk about slots. So there's just limited numbers of these available to provide services back to individuals. So in Ohio right now, and these are rough numbers, but roughly about 20,000 IO waiver slots, okay? And then there's another, we'll get into this later, but another 20 or 30,000 people waiting for an IO waiver, okay? Now the other significant waiver in Ohio is called the Level 1 waiver. That's a smaller waiver, and that package of services is like, it funds up to $5,000, okay? And typically families and individuals use this waiver for like things like respite care. Although you can get like attendance services and home and behavior, home modifications, things like transportation, things like that on the waiver as well. Okay, so that's just kind of like DD Policy 101 in Ohio real quick. But it makes a difference when we're talking about this study, because you're signing up for a waiver, okay? And people have a choice of what kind of waiver they're signing up for. And you're signing up at the county, okay? So that's why I had to mention those terms. And what I've already mentioned is that when you sign up for services, or you're signing up for a waiver, okay? When you sign up for, and by the way, you can sign up for multiple waivers at the same time. When you do that, you're really just providing like your name, where you live, and then they have to register. It's very important that they know when you signed up, because they try to organize things like try to make it as much as possible first come, first serve. However, there's a bunch of exceptions to like first come, first serve in terms of when you actually get a waiver. If there's like an emergency that occurs, then you can jump ahead of the line, and that impacts where you sit on the waiver, on the waiting list. So again, the council's interest, you have this real emotional topic that they want to shed light on. The state's interest is, gee, we're spending more than $1 billion in services. We have this growing waiting list. It's like 41,000 last year. It's probably already 43,000 this year. Do they really need IO waivers? What do they need Because what I've always been told about with waivers, it's like waivers is not a service, it's not a need, it's not a support need thing. It's really just a funding stream, So it doesn't really tell you a lot, okay? So the state's interest is they want to know, they have something that's kind of like out of control here. All these people wanting services they're not able to really provide on a sustainable basis. So they want to know what people are waiting for, so they have an interest as well. And so that's what the study was really designed to do is, okay, let's use the current data the state has, shed some light on it to the extent we can, but also do a survey and actually just ask people, what are you waiting for? I mean, so this isn't like a brilliant study. I mean, it's like really basic. I mean, I think the hardest part for us was political, is can we get all the players to agree that this is like a cool, okay thing to do? Because you're shedding light on something that maybe is uncomfortable for some people. And so that was the cool thing is like all the players, the stars all aligned and said, yeah, this is cool. We want to know what's going on. Okay.
Can I ask a
Yes.
Can you just tell us, so there's 41,000 people on the waiting list for one of those DD waivers. How many people are receiving currently a DD waiver?
No, this is folks that they're not receiving any waiver services.
How many are?
I mean, out of that 41,000, none.
But I mean, there are people receiving a waiver.
Oh, how many are? Okay, I mentioned that just very quickly. It's like 20,000 or so have an IO waiver, and maybe 10,000 have a level 1.
So 30,000 in all?
Yes, and don't quote me exactly. And that's something that's very searchable. You can probably get it right from DODD's website.
So then, I mean, clearly then having a waiver is not an entitlement, right? Because if you have a developmental disabilities, you're not necessarily
That's a great point. Well, you need to have a certain level of need to get a waiver, but most folks who have a developmental disability will meet that kind of clinical criteria, and so it's available from that sense. But you're right. It's not an entitlement in the sense of it's all controlled by the number of slots that's available. Okay. Does that?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's kind of like, I mean, you could qualify for it, but it's not a guarantee you're going to get it, or at least not right away. Now, one thing I didn't mention about waivers, this is very important, is the state has a real interest. You may just think, well, the state and the counties just want to really limit the number of waivers because that's their financial exposure. But that's not necessarily true either, because what they're trying to do and fund these waivers is keep people out in the community as long as possible. So they're really substitutes for, or another way to look at it is they're really substitutes for institutional care. So if they limited the number of slots available for these waivers too much, then they risk creating a lot more demand for institutional services. So they do have an interest in funding as many slots as possible. So I'm seeing some connection there. That's good. So think of waivers too as an important part of keeping individuals out as productive members in the community. Does that make sense? Okay. And so I talked a little bit about the goal of kind of like demystifying what people are waiting for, but it really boils down to is identifying what are the specific needs of those folks on the waiting list now and in the future. And the primary way we tackle that is by doing this survey. Okay, just a couple objectives there is like looking at the waiting list data, providing some general demographics, And then, like I said, through the survey, understanding the specific needs of the individuals. And so this is coming from this collection of all the data, all the waiting list data that's submitted to the state. And so, and that's where that 41,000 unduplicated count came from. But what we want to do is just look at, so we know from this limited data set, we know like when they signed up initially for a waiver. So we have that to deal with. We know what kind of waiver they're signed up for. We know some demographics about the individual. Okay, so let's just try to spin that and see if we can get any truth from that. And so what we have here is just looking at the age of individuals and how long they're waiting for either a level 1 primarily waiver or an IO waiver. So these are in years, okay? So you see for individuals 31 years and older, I mean, you're waiting for like 10 years for a waiver. So this is kind of typical. The average waiting time for any waiver is about 7 years, okay? And what this is saying, and it, you know, kind of makes sense, is like the older you are, the longer you'll have been on a waiting list. One, here you're just born here, so you can't be waiting too long. You can't sign up for services before you're born. Yeah.
Is this, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand this. Is this if you sign up during those categories, how long you'll wait until you get it? Or is this if you get a waiver in that category, how long you've been waiting?
No,
How long you've currently been waiting?
Yeah, it says that you're
Yes.
2 years old and you're still on the waiting list.
Yes.
You've been waiting a
this
year.
is like you're still on. So we just took the waiting list right now. How long?
Yeah.
No, that's a great question, because a common question is like, right.
Why are the little babies getting it so quick?
That's right. Well, but it is a good question. Is like, how can you sign up so quick too? Even so, but yeah, you're right. So everyone's clear. It's just like looking at the waiting list right now. How long have they been on? So is that
Yeah.
okay?
So there's not even a guarantee that you'll get it, it's just how long.
Yes. How long right now, or when I kind of collected the data as of June 2013, how long have they been on there? Okay. And there's already people that are under 2 years old that were waiting for a year, half their lifetime. Okay, but we'll kind of like unpack that. Well, why do you think that's the case? I mean, this actually has information in it right in it of itself, because the way the system works, okay, is people know. They just know right from the get-go. It's like there's not going to be enough services for everybody here. Okay, they know there's a waiting list, and so they're told by somebody, okay, you better sign up for services right now. Does that? I mean, you better sign up right now, because it's going to take you a long time to get services. So does it make sense to sign up here? It may, because you never know how long it's going to take, okay? When we actually did this survey of 1,100 people, I had, you always get some blowback when you do these surveys. So I had some people call, and they're like, I've never been on a wait. Why are you doing this survey? I'm not even on the waiting list. It was so long ago, they forgot they were on. So it's just interesting that way. But you can see this kind of leveling off. Well, as the individual gets older, they've been waiting longer. And here, when the individual's 65 and older, and that's a caregiver that's going to be 85, let's say, or older. I mean, so waiting, for 12 years. Yes.
From a time perspective, when did the waivers start to exist? So these older individuals, when would people have started to have signed up and like?
That's a great question, right? So that's excellent. So waivers were first on the scene probably the start in the 90s, okay, but not really significant until like late 90s, early 2000. Okay. So another thing we can learn is just, is there differences in how long people wait or waiting list times by area? And so here you don't see a lot of variation, but I guess I thought when we would slice and dice the information that people would be waiting for services longer where? In a rural area or an urban area? What do you think? What's that? Rural, right? You just think, man, rural, and this is true in the DD system in Ohio. There's these huge variations in funding between counties, and so you would think, in the rural counties, not as much funding, so you're going to be waiting longer. Well, what the waiting list tells you, though, it's not just the demand you're talking about, it's also the supply. So the demand-supply balance is actually, it's not that much different. In fact, it's almost better in rural Appalachian counties compared to suburban or urban counties. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, what's a possible explanation of this? One is people tend to figure out that, yes, urban areas offer more services, and so what do? They move there. So creates more waiting list time. So it's not like everybody's getting together here and figuring out what's the best strategy. The best strategy is how can I get services for my loved one? Okay. And finally, so these are the waiting list average times by waiver. And the main thing I wanted to point out here is people are waiting a lot longer for the IO waiver compared to the level 1 waiver. You can also sign up for both, and I have stats for both, but it's just harder. You're going to be waiting longer if you're waiting for an IO. And to me that makes sense because these are more expensive waivers. The supply-demand imbalance is greater for an IO than a level 1. So a lot of times what people do is it's possible, I did kind of lie when you asked that question, you can have a level 1 and sign up for an IO waiver. And so that's common. Okay, so that kind of just gives us a little, dips our toe in the water in terms of this topic. So from there, we put together a survey, and I don't know if you got that. We have copies of actually the survey questions, and I'm not going to read through each survey questions, but it's really a basic survey. And what we're focused on unmet needs of the individual, either currently or in the future. So that's, so it's not a real long survey. We really had a goal of just making it 5 minutes. We felt like it was important that we did this survey through telephone because we really wanted complete and solid information. I've done some mail surveys, and especially for a topic like this, just didn't really trust that the information was going to be that robust in getting the information back. So we wanted to do a telephone survey, but then that gets into some expense, and so we wanted to make it quick. Also, we just didn't really want to tax the individual or family in terms of their time any more than was really needed. So we just had a few things we needed to ask, and then thank you very much, and then you're done. So we got the sample frame. We got the list of persons from the department. They didn't have telephone numbers. They had addresses. So we had to kind of marry that information through a service, and they were able to give us telephone numbers off of that through an address-based telephone match service. And so out of the 15,000 people randomly selected by DODD, and actually Kent State was able to hire a vendor, boil down like 5,000 available phone numbers. So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds in terms of how we did the survey, and then we'll get into the results. So, we went and did a number of different revisions of the surveys, and ran that by some folks with developmental disabilities just to see how understandable the questions were. And I've already mentioned the focus was on unmet needs. Also asked questions about the caregiver, which is a really important issue for the state, for policymakers. And also just different perceptions about the waiting list. Like, do you feel like you've been on the waiting list a long time? Things like that. And the interviewers at Kent State used were like students like yourself. So I really appreciated that, because we've done a number of telephone survey type studies, and you really, it's important for those interviewers to be somewhat motivated, and these students really were. I mean, they understood. I mean, we kind of gave them a little talk about like why this is important, and they were very fired up. And that's important when you do a survey. Okay, what do I want to say here? So actually, we had a goal of this lasting about 5 minutes. It actually turned out to take 11 minutes. So doesn't sound like a long time, but in terms of expense, it's a long time. So we actually got a good deal from Kent State. They swallowed that extra 6 minutes. And we took a random sample of 1,100 folks, and our response rate was 52%, which is pretty decent in the survey world. My familiarity, though, with folks with developmental disabilities, it tends to be a lot higher, because people are very interested in this topic. They're somewhat vested. They're going to respond to your survey. So, I mean, it's kind of cool. We got a high response rate, but that's also kind of normal for the field. And when I'm talking about any results that come from the survey instrument, in terms of, let's say, what was your primary unmet need? And they said transportation. 20% of folks said transportation. Well, that's within a confidence interval, plus or minus 3% to get you at the 95% confidence level. Okay, so that kind of just gives you kind of a benchmark when I'm talking about for any of the survey results. And so this is our first. Well, actually, one other thing. If you look at the survey questions, and the focus is on unmet need, we broke the categories down. We didn't want to just create like an open-ended question like, hey, tell me about your need. I mean, because then, we'd get these answers all over the board, and then we'd have to kind of try to figure out ways to classify it. So some of it was just like laziness. We just didn't want to do that. But part of it too is like, then you get into the issue of, well, how do you classify things? So we thought it'd be cleaner to classify this up front. So we created categories, and I got to say, really, the Department of Developmental Disabilities is very helpful in crafting these categories. So we crafted these categories. So everything, a lot of what you're going to see is in these categories of unmet need. So something to do during the day. Medical care, place to stay, transportation, and help with daily activities. Now, I mean, maybe that doesn't sound like it covers the waterfront of need for an individual, but we felt like that mainly did. What's interesting about these categories, though, is they don't always relate back to the waiver. Okay, medical care, that isn't directly funded through a waiver. Okay, now when you sign up for a waiver, you qualify for Medicaid at the same time. That gives you a Medicaid card so you can get health care services, but you can get that through Medicaid. You don't have to get that through a waiver. Okay, go, yeah,
So
good.
If you have a need, like a wheelchair ramp in your house, what category would that be under?
Okay, yes, so adaptive equipment. That one, yeah, that would come under other. So we didn't hit all of them. You're right, and that was kind of like a popular other one. So we did have a lot of maybe 100 comments where they did lay out, because we did provide them with an other option, and that was a common one. So that's where we probably need to tweak this survey to make it. Maybe we need to ask something about equipment. Yeah.
Well, is the green no unmet need or what?
Yeah, that's right. And I forgot to change a slide. It's like, what's the green? The green is, yeah, it's a big percent, and it's a big deal in terms of the study, because this is like, the department was very, very interested in knowing or making sure the survey asked, hey, you may not have an unmet need. Is that the box you want to check? Okay. So the aha of this slide, and really I think one of the bigger findings of the study is currently 46% of folks on the waiting list aren't waiting for anything. I mean, they don't have any current need, okay? Now, you got to hang in there with me because we look at the future too. But currently, 46% said they had no unmet need. Now I wanted to mention too that so we had 1,100 responses. 134 of those, or about 12% of those responses, came from individuals. The other 88% came from family members. So it kind of depends. I mean, so we had a screener type question that said, are you able to answer these questions, or do you feel like you can ask them or answer them on behalf of the individual? Okay, and so 88% of the time we got family members who said, no, I'm going to answer it on behalf of the individual. 12% we actually had individual responses. But if you look at, and I'm sorry to do this for you, but I'll go to the next slide. These slides look a lot the same, okay? There's not a lot of difference. They both had the big green slices, okay? So family members, when they answered, they said, 46% of families said there's no unmet need. Now, there was some differences between the individuals and the families. So individuals, for instance, they, is that family? I'm sorry, let me go. Okay, individuals. Individuals, they're more focused on something to do during the day. 19%, they had a current need for that. Families are like, 14%, okay? So let's look at help with daily activities. Individuals, 10% said that. Families are like 14%. So there's like, some differences, and that you would expect that, and that would be some cool future research. It's like, why are these differences occurring? But for the remaining results I'm going to share, we just lumped all the responses together. It's primarily families answering on behalf of individuals. By the way, these differences accentuate a lot more when you're talking about future services, okay? And that's another topic I'm not going to get into. So let's look at, okay, so when you lump all the results together, this is what it looks like, kind of similar to what we talked about. And then we're going to look at the future unmet need. Okay, so what you see here is this green slice shrinks considerably. So in the current, people said, 46% of them didn't have any unmet need. Well, that goes down. It goes down to 15%. When you're looking at the future. Now, question is, what do you mean by the future? Is that future like 5 years from now? No, we just asked, do you have a need sometime in the future? What is it? Okay. And then when they indicated what that need was, let's say they said they had a need for transportation, then we asked, well, do you need it between 0 and 1 year, 1 to 5 years, or 5 years and greater? So that's how we did it. And then we asked, if you said transportation was a need, we asked a lot of questions about like what type of transportation do you need, okay? Or if you had something to do during the day, then we asked, so they're like branches. Yes, go ahead.
So is the implication that that need is currently being met by natural supports, family members, friends?
Right. Well, I mean, it does still beg the question is like 15% say they don't have any future need. So why are you on the waiting list? I mean, 15, I could understand current because I kind of laid out for you. You could very well be signing up for services sometime for the future. So I can understand that. But why do you have 15%? Why do you think? Any thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering, is it possible that the individuals that don't have unmet needs are somehow receiving or meeting their needs in a way that costs the government something? Like, is this something that the fact that we're not able to provide waivers for everyone that needs them, is that of a cost to our government in any way?
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
So if the point of the waivers is to replace the need for something else, like institutional care.
Yes, right.
Is it possible some of the individuals who don't have unmet needs have received services in other ways that were
Oh,
also funded by the government?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, they could have figured out a way to get other services. Absolutely. That's right. Or like Director Tossi was saying, or even informally, they could have figured out. So that's a possible answer to this 15%. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this like the aggregate of families and individuals?
Yes, it's the aggregate.
Do you have it broken down?
Yes, we do have it broken
If
down.
it's more individuals saying no, because I just wonder if there's the difficulty projecting yourself into the future and then anticipating a future need. If you're
That's
okay
a-
now, that it might be hard for them to picture, well, what might my life be like and what might I need? That's a lot of cognitive demand.
That's fair. That is fair.
I just didn't know they were overrepresented maybe in that 15%.
Well, now, I forget. Actually, it was still a significant chunk for both categories. Okay, but that's a good point. One thing I had a family member actually try to describe why this might occur. He said, he signed up for services for his son way ahead of time, but he didn't know what he really needed. He just knew he had to sign up for something. Well, he figured out he didn't really need anything, or he doesn't need anything currently. So it's possible that you have a situation where you're being told, you're going to need services for your kid, so get on the waiting list. And then, you kind of figured out, like you said, you kind of figured out how to take care of your son or daughter. And it's like even going into the future, you figured out, I don't know if I have a need, yeah.
I just utilized your wonderfully organized tables in here to find that information for you very quickly.
Oh, thank you.
2% of individuals and 12% of parents said no future unmet needs. There was a
32%?
32.8% of individuals, but only 12.9% of parents and guardians said no future unmet need.
Yeah.
So
So no, so that could be like a whole interesting topic itself, because from the individual perspective, it's like, come on, we're cool.
That could be cloak of confidence,
Well, right. Yeah, no, that's right.
which is not uncommon for people with developmental disabilities.
Right. Well, that's fair. So, okay.
Do you think you would get a similar result if you looked at 20-year-olds who just got a waiver? I don't need any services now, but I'm thinking I will in the future, so I'm going to hoard this money until I need it. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like,
No, I
there's
think,
a sense that once you get it, you have it for life, and so
You don't want to say I
you
don't need
don't
it.
want to say I don't
money.
need it.
Yeah.
right. Well, you're definitely going to get different results. This is primarily, now you could have a level 1, but this is primarily coming from people that don't have services, covered, but it's still, I think, is a good point. You're going to get different responses by age of individual, and we do break it out, I believe, maybe not in this report. By the way, we have a website at Government Resource Center, and we have a developmental disability section, and this study is on there, and then put up some additional tables, so 10 minutes. So the additional tables actually break out some of the survey results by age of individuals. So that'd be kind of interesting to look at. Okay, well, let me just point out a couple other things on future primary unmet need. So one of the other bigger slices of the pie here is something to do during the day. 21% of respondents said they would need that. But I wanted to point out place to stay, because that was where the biggest growth was. If you look back at current needs, only 3% of respondents said currently we have a need for a place to stay, and that grew to 16%. So that's certainly a concern for a significant minority of the waiting list population. And just to remember, all these statistics you're seeing here are just of the waiting list population. It's not of the general kind of like DD population. Okay, so that's really important. I forgot to qualify that. Okay, so this is another way to look at the information, and that you could, in this survey, you could say I have more than one unmet need. And so this is saying, okay, there's some that said 0. We already mentioned that. 46% current versus 15% into the future at 0. Then you could just look at the number of unmet needs, just aggregate them. And so on the scale of 5 or 6 unmet needs, you had actually 23% of folks who said they had a future unmet need. 23% of respondents had 5 or 6 of them. So if you think of unmet needs, if you tally them up as kind of like markers of acuity, so to speak, that this is your spectrum of need. We also, as I indicated, we asked about the age distribution of the caregivers, and this is kind of interesting here. 17% folks over 65, 22% between 55 and 64. So you have almost 40% of the caregiving population 55 and older. And this is this is a big concern to policymakers. They're nervous, they're concerned about the caregivers not being able to provide care in the future. And we're gonna have a slide, I'll end off probably with it, where it shows what do caregivers over 65 or over 60 say about their needs versus under 60. So there's a specific question on the survey that asks, okay, how much longer, and you got to kind of think of this from the respondent perspective. So it's either the individual or the family member asking on behalf of the individual. They're talking about the caregiver. Well, a lot of times that's a family member and they're the caregiver, okay? So you're asking, how much longer can the caregiver provide care for the individual? And so 2% of the respondents said, man, only up to 1 year more, that's it. So this is definitely a concern for the state, okay? And then 10% said within 1 to 5 years. It's a little bit more concern for a state, but after 5 years, like that's forever, man, we don't care. I shouldn't say that, but they're really concerned about, the first 2 bars here. So 12% of the waiting list population, they're gonna need care pretty soon, okay? And so, what you can do with that information, okay, we'll see, I could talk about that a little bit more later. This is another thing that came off of the survey was, well, how do you intend to use your waiver didn't learn as much on this question because they're using it for everything. So so not a lot of distinction between place to stay, medical care, etc. Where did you get your referral source? How did you even find out about the waiting list? Well, through the county board itself. So people, by and large, they go for services through their county board. The other slices of the pie, doctor, medical professional, family or friends, those are kind of like evenly parsed out. Okay, so this is the slide I wanted to kind of end off on. So different cool ways you can slice this information. And so the state policymakers are interested in caregivers. So I thought, well, let's look at the information by those 60 and over and under 60. And so what you see here, and let's look at categories of unmet need. So what you see here is for those respondents who where the individual, or excuse me, where the caregiver was 60 and over, 25% said they had a need of something to do during the day. Over 60 said 15%. 15% of response said that. So that's kind of interesting in itself. Younger people, it's like, man, my individual, my loved one needs something to do during the day. Okay, that's my focus. But what's kind of interesting to me is this no area of unmet need again. 21% of folks over 60 said they had no current unmet need, okay? And under 60, 11% of folks, no unmet need. Okay, so I'm getting some quizzical looks.
Well, I'm just
I think that's good sign that you're getting connecting, yeah.
Well, 60 and under, the caregiver is more likely to be employed themselves and working, so they need someone to care for their child during the day. But once you're retired, the caregiver is more able to provide that support.
Okay, that's a good explanation. I mean, what I thought going into it is like, hey, I'm kind of winding down here as a caregiver. I mean, because it's harder and harder to take care of this individual as I get older, so I'd be more likely not to have any unmet need. The other thought about this is, what we have found somewhat through the literature is when you start aging like that, I mean, the caregiver starts relying also on the individual emotionally and just to provide services sometimes. So they actually, it's like a symbiotic relationship where it's like you want your individual around. Now that may not occur a ton, but I think it occurs some. Any other thoughts?
Is this for current unmet needs?
Yes, current, yes. Yes. Oh,
The housing and where they reside, do we have any data on whether are all these people residing with the caregiver, with the parent or the guardian, or are some of them in group homes or other?
that's a great question too. That is a great question. So this is all waiting list data. Typically, the individual is residing at the parent's home. We did try to survey folks that were in group homes, but if you think about it, it's like folks in group homes are likely to have a waiver. They're not going to be privately funding that. So by and large, these people are living. So that's a very good question though. So think about it. It's like these individuals are probably living with the caregiver. Yes.
For the no areas of unmet need,
Yes.
how would institutionalization work into that? Because I'm imagining, okay, these adults are now over 40. That's going back. There's a high probability that institutionalization would have been much more common when they were children than it is now, and so I could envision I don't have any unmet need because I didn't institutionalize my child when I was young, when they were younger. If I would have, they probably would have a waiver right now because if they were institutionalized, to get them out of the institution would require a waiver. And I don't want it to seem like I need help now when I didn't need it when they were younger.
Right, so you're saying the fact that people don't put their individuals in institutions as much as they did 20 years ago would impact kind of like what,
I wasn't willing to do it 40 years ago when they were born.
right,
So I'm
right.
not willing to accept help now, or I don't want to admit that I need help now.
Well, no, and that's a very good point, because I think you get that with this, the current older generation is a lot different than the, 40 and younger generation, okay? So, 60 and older folks, they're very much like, yeah, I don't really need help. I'm good, okay? Whereas people over here, it's like, I could use some help with something to do during the day, okay? So, I think you're onto something. I think there are, and maybe some of it's institutionalization, maybe some of it's just more self-reliance. In terms of older people, I think that kind of maybe enter into it. And I know we have like 1 minute. So one final, great question. This has been great interaction, yeah.
I wonder if you have demographic information about the adults with developmental, children with developmental disabilities. I'm imagining that if the child, the adult child, has a lot of physical needs, then as you get older, it's more of a burden for you to be lifting and doing all the personal care.
Right.
for some of these
So this is like a real weakness of the study is we didn't want to ask a lot of these kind of demographic questions in the survey. One, we felt like, wow, the department has that information already. We weren't able, for reasons I don't want to bore you with, but we weren't able to link up real well with the department's data. So we don't have we have like age, sex, but the department does collect like level of mental retardation, but it's not very complete. So we don't have good information on that at all. So no good other like clinical markers of the individual.
And you would have
on
an Ohio DDP on all of these people on the wait list, wouldn't you?
Right, well, but the DDP relates back to a waiver. These guys are on a waiting list, so.
So on the waiting list, they don't get the DDP?
No, the DDP relates to primarily the IO waiver. Yeah, so you don't have a lot of good information on the individual, even if we are perfectly linked up for all these survey respondents. So, hey, thanks a lot.
Thank
This is
you,
a
Barry.
great.
All right, thank you for